Get off the yacht. You're embarrassing the guests." The sentence didn't just land. It cut, sharp and public, slicing clean through the music, the laughter, the soft clink of crystal glasses that had filled the upper deck just seconds before. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Heads turned in slow, curious unison. The ocean stretched wide and dark behind the vessel, miles off the coast, the skyline of Miami glowing like a promise in the distance. And in the center of it all stood Malcolm Hayes, still, composed, dressed in nothing more than a fitted charcoal shirt, tailored slacks, and quiet confidence that didn't ask for attention but somehow commanded it anyway. He didn't move. Not when the hostess stepped closer. Not when her heels clicked sharply against the polished teak deck. Not even when her hand reached out and rested on his arm. Not gentle, not respectful, but corrective, like she was adjusting something out of place. "Sir," she added, her voice lower now, but no less firm, "you need to leave. This section is reserved." Malcolm's eyes shifted, not to her hand, not to the guests watching, but to her face. Calm, measuring. The kind of calm that didn't come from uncertainty, but from experience. He had seen this before. The same tone, the same assumption, different setting, same script. Around them, the party continued in fragments. A group near the bar whispered behind half-raised glasses. A man in a white linen blazer leaned toward his date, murmuring something with a glance in Malcolm's direction. A woman lifted her phone just slightly, pretending to check a message while angling for a better view. The air had changed. It wasn't festive anymore. It was charged. "I'm not in the wrong place," Malcolm said, his voice even, unhurried, carrying just enough to be heard without needing to rise. The hostess, Vanessa Cole, blinked once, then twice, as if recalibrating. Blonde hair pulled into a sleek low bun, navy dress fitted perfectly to the brand's image, posture trained to project control. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I understand that you might be confused," she replied, each word polished, practiced. "But this is a private yacht event. Invitation only." Malcolm nodded once, slowly, like he had expected that answer before she even spoke it. He glanced briefly past her, over the deck, taking in the scene. White furniture, soft gold lighting, a live DJ tucked discreetly near the helm, waitstaff moving like choreography, every detail curated to signal exclusivity, every detail reinforcing the same unspoken rule. You either belonged or you didn't. "Then check again," he said. No edge, no challenge, just a statement. Vanessa's smile thinned. Behind her, a tall man in a navy suit, event manager, badge clipped discreetly at his waist, began walking toward them, his expression already set in mild irritation. He had seen this kind of situation before, or at least, he thought he had. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, stepping beside Vanessa, his presence adding weight to her authority. "He's not on the list," Vanessa said, not taking her eyes off Malcolm. "And he's refusing to leave the VIP section." The man's gaze moved over Malcolm, quick but deliberate, scanning, categorizing, concluding. It took less than 2 seconds. "Sir," he said, voice firm now, "we're going to need you to step off the yacht." There it was. Not a question, not a request. A decision already made. Malcolm exhaled softly, almost amused, though nothing in his expression gave it away. Around them, more phones were visible now. Not hidden, not subtle. People were watching, recording, waiting. He could feel it, the shift, the collective awareness that something was unfolding. Not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. Vanessa adjusted her stance, her hand still lightly on his arm, as if maintaining contact reinforced her control over the situation. "We've had incidents before," she added, her tone tightening just enough to reveal the assumption beneath it. People trying to walk into events they weren't invited to. Malcolm's eyes flickered for a moment, something deeper passing through them, something older. For a split second, the yacht disappeared. In its place, a memory. A hotel lobby, years ago. Marble floors. A younger version of himself standing at the desk, ID in hand, being asked twice, then 3 times, to confirm a reservation that had already been paid in full. "We just need to verify," they had said. Always verify. Always question. Always doubt. The memory faded as quickly as it came. Back to the yacht. Back to the present. Back to Vanessa's hand still resting where it didn't belong. Malcolm looked down at it briefly, then back up at her. "You should let go," he said quietly. Not a threat, not a warning, just a fact. Vanessa hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before pulling her hand back, masking the moment with a small, controlled breath. The manager stepped closer now, closing the distance, asserting presence. "We're not going to argue about this," he said. "If you don't leave on your own, we'll have security escort you." The word escort hung in the air, heavier than it needed to be. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, more interested now. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was becoming something else. Malcolm's gaze moved past the manager, scanning the deck again, not for validation, not for support, but as if he was taking inventory. People, reactions, silence. He noticed the phones, the whispers, the way some guests avoided eye contact while others stared openly. He noticed who spoke and who didn't. Then he looked back at the manager. "You didn't check," Malcolm said. The manager frowned. "Excuse me." "You didn't check the list," Malcolm repeated. "You looked at me and decided." The words landed differently than the first sentence had. Quieter, but heavier. The manager's jaw tightened. "I don't need to check," he replied. "I know who's supposed to be here." A faint murmur rippled through the nearby crowd. Someone whispered, "That's not a good look." Another voice, barely audible, "This is about to go left." Vanessa crossed her arms now, defensive posture replacing polished hospitality. "Sir, this is your final warning," she said. "Please step off the yacht." Malcolm didn't move. Not an inch. The ocean behind him was calm, endless, indifferent. The city lights shimmered in the distance, a reminder of everything built, everything owned, everything earned. And yet here, on this deck, none of that seemed to matter. Or rather, it hadn't been allowed to matter. Until now. He reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, pulling out his phone. The motion alone shifted the tension. The manager's eyes narrowed. Vanessa straightened slightly. A few guests leaned in closer, anticipating something. Malcolm unlocked the screen, his expression unchanged, his movements precise. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He simply tapped a contact and raised the phone to his ear. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. "Yeah," Malcolm said, his voice low but clear enough to carry just beyond the immediate circle. "I'm on the upper deck." A pause. He listened, eyes steady on the manager now. "No," he added, almost casually. "They haven't checked anything." Another pause. The manager shifted his weight, uncertainty flickering for the first time. Vanessa's posture tightened again, her confidence beginning to show small cracks. "Who are you calling?" she demanded, her voice sharper now, less controlled. Malcolm didn't answer her. He kept his gaze forward, listening, then nodding once. "Go ahead," he said into the phone. "Put it through." He lowered the phone slightly, still in his hand, not ending the call, just waiting. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of eyes, full of tension, full of the slow, creeping realization that something about this moment wasn't going the way it was supposed to. The manager opened his mouth to speak again, to regain control, to reassert the script he was used to following. But before he could, Malcolm looked at him and spoke. Calm, precise, unshaken. "You might want to answer your phone," he said. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the manager hesitated completely, his confidence faltering as his pocket began to vibrate. The vibration in his pocket did not stop. It grew louder in his mind than the music, louder than the ocean, louder than the quiet judgment hanging in the air. The manager froze for a fraction of a second, then quickly reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, forcing a small, dismissive smile, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Excuse me," he muttered, turning slightly away from the crowd, but not far enough to escape their attention. His eyes flicked down to the screen, and whatever confidence he had left drained instantly. His posture changed first, shoulders tightening, jaw locking. Then his voice followed, lower now, controlled but no longer certain. "Hello." A pause, the kind that stretches longer than it should. His gaze lifted slowly, almost unwillingly, back toward Malcolm, who had not moved, who had not raised his voice, who had not needed to. Around them, the guests leaned in without stepping forward. Phones were no longer subtle. They were steady, focused, capturing every second. The hostess noticed the shift before anyone else said a word. Vanessa's eyes moved from the manager's face to his phone, then back again, reading something she could not hear but could clearly feel. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight, controlled, but edged with something new. The manager did not answer immediately. He listened, nodded once. Then again, his free hand came up, pressing lightly against his temple as if trying to process too many things at once. "Yes," he said into the phone. "He is here." Another pause, this one heavier. The silence around them thickened. Even the music from the speakers seemed distant now, like it belonged to a different moment entirely. A woman near the bar whispered, "Something just changed." A man beside her nodded, eyes fixed on Malcolm. "Yeah, this is not what they thought it was." Vanessa stepped closer to the manager, lowering her voice. "Ryan, what is going on?" she pressed, but her composure was beginning to slip. The manager, Ryan Carter, swallowed once before speaking again into the phone. "No, I did not verify the list," he admitted, each word slower than the last. "I made a judgment call." The phrase landed like a confession. Not loud, but undeniable. Malcolm watched him without expression, without satisfaction, without anger. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that does not react because it already understands the outcome. Ryan listened again, his face tightening further, then nodded sharply. "Understood," he said. "I will handle it." The call ended. He lowered the phone slowly, as if it had become heavier in his hand. For a moment, he did not speak. He just stood there, caught between what he had assumed and what he had just learned. Vanessa's voice broke through first. "Ryan," she said, more urgently now, "you need to tell me what is happening." He looked at her, really looked this time, not as a colleague, not as a team member, but as someone who had just stepped into something neither of them could control anymore. "You should not have touched him," he said quietly. The words hit her harder than anything else had so far. "What?" she snapped, her composure cracking. "He was not supposed to be here." Ryan shook his head once, slowly. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The shift was immediate. Not explosive, not dramatic, but absolute. Vanessa's expression faltered, confusion flooding in where certainty had been just seconds before. "That does not make any sense," she said, almost to herself. "He is not on the list." Malcolm's voice cut through again, calm, steady. "That list does not include everyone who matters." The guests reacted before Vanessa could. A low murmur spread across the deck, curiosity turning into realization, realization turning into anticipation. Someone whispered, "Who is he?" Another voice answered, "I think they messed up." Vanessa turned back to Malcolm, her eyes searching his face now, no longer judging, but trying to understand. "Who are you?" she asked, the question no longer rhetorical. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, considering her for a brief moment, then shifted his gaze back to Ryan. "Do you want to explain?" he said. "Or should I?" Ryan exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation settling fully on his shoulders. He glanced around at the crowd, at the phones, at the guests who were no longer pretending not to watch. Then he straightened, not in confidence, but in acceptance. "He is not on the guest list," Ryan said, his voice carrying just enough for those closest to hear. "Because he does not need to be." A beat of silence followed. Then another. Vanessa's brow furrowed, her mind racing to catch up. "What does that mean?" she demanded. Ryan looked at Malcolm again, then back at her. "It means," he said carefully, "that we just tried to remove someone who has full authority over this entire event." The words landed differently this time. Not like a cut, like a collapse. The structure of everything that had just happened began to fold in on itself, piece by piece, assumption by assumption. Vanessa stepped back slightly, her posture no longer rigid, no longer controlled. "That is not possible," she said, but there was no conviction behind it anymore. Malcolm finally took a step forward. Just one. Enough to close the distance that had been forced between them. Enough to shift the dynamic completely. "You were confident," he said, not accusing, not mocking, just stating a fact. "Confident enough to decide who belongs and who does not without checking anything." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The words she had used earlier, the certainty she had carried, they no longer fit the moment. Ryan looked down briefly, then back up, his voice quieter now. "The call was from corporate," he said. "From the executive line." The crowd reacted again, louder this time. Phones lifted higher. Whispers turned into open speculation. "Corporate?" someone repeated. "On a Saturday night?" Another voice. This is serious. Malcolm's phone buzzed softly in his hand. He glanced at it, then back at Ryan. They told you what to do next, he said. Ryan nodded once. Yes. Then do it, Malcolm replied. No raised voice. No emphasis. Just instruction. Ryan turned fully toward Vanessa now, the shift in his authority unmistakable. We need to correct this immediately, he said. And we need to do it in front of everyone who just watched it happen. Vanessa's breathing had changed. Slightly faster. Slightly uneven. Not panic. Not yet. But close. She looked around the deck, at the guests, at the phones, at the eyes that were no longer neutral. Then she looked back at Malcolm, and for the first time since the moment began, there was no assumption left in her expression. Only realization. Only the beginning of something she could not undo. Vanessa did not speak right away. The silence around her was no longer neutral. It pressed in from every direction, carried by the weight of watching eyes and the quiet hum of phones capturing everything. She had been in control of this space minutes ago. Now she stood in the same spot, but the ground beneath her felt unfamiliar, unstable, like something had shifted that she could not see but could no longer ignore. Ryan stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Vanessa and Malcolm, not as a barrier, but as someone trying to regain structure in a moment that had already slipped past him. We need to address this, he said, his voice steady but stripped of its earlier authority. It was not a command anymore. It was a correction. Malcolm did not respond immediately. He let the moment breathe. He let the tension sit exactly where it was, unfinished, unresolved, undeniable. Around them, the guests had stopped pretending. Conversations were no longer hushed. They were direct now, open, layered with curiosity and quiet judgment. A man near the railing leaned toward his friend and said, "This is what happens when people assume too fast." The friend nodded, eyes fixed on Malcolm. "No, this is what happens when people decide who matters before they check the facts." Vanessa heard them. She did not turn, but she heard every word. And for the first time, the narrative she had built in her mind just minutes ago began to unravel completely. "I was doing my job," she said finally, her voice tight, controlled, but no longer confident. It sounded like a defense, but it landed like doubt. Malcolm's gaze shifted to her again. Not sharp, not aggressive, just clear. "Your job," he repeated softly, "is to welcome guests, not filter them based on what you think they represent." The words did not rise. They did not need to. They carried more weight because of what had already happened. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened, a reflex more than a choice. "We have standards," she replied, almost instinctively. The moment the words left her mouth, she realized they did not hold the same power they had before. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose, as if the situation had just taken another step in the wrong direction. Malcolm did not react outwardly, but something in his expression shifted. Not anger, not frustration, recognition. "Standards," he said quietly. "That is an interesting word." He took another step forward, slow, deliberate, closing the space between them not to intimidate, but to be fully present in the moment that had been created around him. "Tell me," he continued, his voice calm, almost conversational, "what standard did you use?" Vanessa hesitated, not because she did not have an answer, but because the answer she had no longer sounded as clear as it had before. The silence stretched. The guests leaned in again. Ryan did not interrupt. He could not. This was no longer something he could manage. This was something unfolding on its own terms. Vanessa finally spoke, but her words came slower now, measured, uncertain. "You were not dressed like the other guests," she said. "You were not on the visible list. And you walked into a restricted section without checking in." Each point sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they revealed something else entirely. Malcolm nodded once, acknowledging each word without agreeing to any of them. "So you saw what I was wearing," he said. "You saw what you did not see on your list. And you decided that was enough." Vanessa's lips parted slightly, but she did not answer. She did not need to. The answer had already been given. A woman near the bar spoke up, her voice clear enough to carry. "He did not even raise his voice," she said. "And you still treated him like he was a problem." Another guest added, "You did not verify anything. You just reacted." The pressure in the air shifted again, no longer just focused on Malcolm, but spreading outward, turning the moment into something larger than a single interaction. Ryan stepped in carefully. "We are going to correct this," he said, louder now, addressing not just Vanessa, but the crowd as well. This was a mistake. The word mistake echoed differently than intended. It sounded smaller than what had actually happened. Malcolm's eyes moved briefly toward the guests, then back to Ryan. "It was not a mistake," he said. "It was a decision." The distinction landed immediately. A mistake could be dismissed. A decision had to be owned. Ryan nodded slowly, accepting that shift. "You are right," he said. "It was a decision, and it was the wrong one." Vanessa's posture faltered again, the last pieces of her certainty slipping away. She looked at Malcolm, then at Ryan, then at the crowd, as if trying to find somewhere to place herself in a situation that no longer aligned with how it had started. "I did not know," she said, her voice quieter now. Malcolm's response came without hesitation. "You did not need to know." The simplicity of it cut deeper than any accusation could have. The guests reacted again, some nodding, others exchanging glances that said the same thing without words. Ryan took a step back, giving Malcolm space, not out of deference, but out of understanding. The center of the moment had shifted completely. Malcolm was no longer being evaluated. He was defining the moment itself. The music from the speakers faded slightly, as someone near the control panel adjusted the volume, unintentionally amplifying the silence that followed. The ocean moved steadily beyond the deck, indifferent, constant. Malcolm looked around once more, taking in the full scene, the guests, the staff, the energy that had transformed from celebration to confrontation to realization. Then he spoke again, his voice carrying just enough to reach those closest, but clear enough to ripple outward. "This is how it happens," he said. Not loudly, not obviously, just a quick decision, a quick assumption, and suddenly someone does not belong. No one interrupted. No one moved. The moment held. Vanessa lowered her gaze for the first time, not in defeat, but in recognition. Not of who Malcolm was, but of what she had done. Ryan straightened slightly, preparing himself for what came next, whatever form it would take. Because this was no longer about fixing a situation. It was about facing it. And Malcolm Hayes stood at the center of it, calm, steady, and completely in control without ever needing to prove it. The silence did not break. It deepened. It settled over the deck like a weight no one could step around. Even the ocean seemed quieter now, the gentle rhythm of waves against the hull fading into the background as every eye stayed locked on Malcolm. He did not rush to fill the space. He did not raise his voice to claim it. He simply stood there, letting the truth of the moment expand on its own. Vanessa shifted her stance again, but this time it was not to assert control. It was to steady herself. Her hands, once precise and composed, now hovered uncertainly at her sides as if unsure where they belonged. The certainty she had worn like a uniform minutes ago had disappeared completely, replaced by something far more difficult to hold on to. Awareness. "I did not mean for this to go that way," she said, her voice lower now, stripped of its earlier edge. It was not an excuse. It was not even a defense. It was an admission wrapped in hesitation. Malcolm's gaze remained steady, but there was no softness in it. Not because he lacked empathy, but because he understood something she was only beginning to see. "That is exactly how it goes," he replied. His tone was even, measured, almost reflective. "No one ever means for it to go that way." The words did not accuse. They revealed. A quiet murmur passed through the guests again, but this time it carried something different. Not curiosity, recognition. A man near the edge of the deck folded his arms and nodded slowly. "He is right," he said under his breath, but loud enough for those beside him to hear. "It always starts small." Ryan stepped forward again, but carefully this time, aware that every word now mattered more than before. "We are going to make this right," he said, addressing Malcolm directly. Immediately, Malcolm turned his head slightly, acknowledging him without fully shifting his stance. "What does right look like to you?" he asked. The question was simple, but it stopped Ryan completely. Because for the first time, this was not about correcting a situation. It was about defining accountability in real time. Ryan hesitated, searching for an answer that would not sound rehearsed, that would not sound like damage control. But before he could respond, another voice entered the moment. "It starts with telling the truth." All heads turned. The voice came from behind the bar. A young woman, one of the service staff, stepped forward hesitantly. Her posture was not confident, but her voice carried enough clarity to hold attention. He did not disrupt anything, she continued. He walked in quietly. No one asked him anything before she did. She glanced briefly at Vanessa, then back at Malcolm. And he did not raise his voice. Not once. The statement hung in the air, simple but undeniable. Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to escape, but to process. Because hearing it from someone else made it real in a way her own thoughts had not yet fully accepted. Ryan nodded slowly. Then we say that, he replied. Out loud. He turned toward the guests, drawing a breath as if preparing for something larger than a standard correction. Everyone, he said, his voice carrying across the deck. We need to acknowledge what just happened. The crowd quieted instantly. Phones remained raised, but the energy shifted again. This was no longer just observation. It was participation. A decision was made without verification, Ryan continued. An assumption was made based on appearance instead of information. And that decision was wrong. He did not look at Malcolm when he said it. He did not need to. The statement was not for him alone. It was for everyone who had witnessed it. A few guests nodded. Others remained still, absorbing the words. Vanessa stood beside him, her posture no longer defensive, no longer rigid. She looked forward, not at Malcolm, not at the crowd, but somewhere in between, as if she was finally seeing the space clearly for the first time. Malcolm watched Ryan carefully, not for performance, but for intent. There was a difference, and he knew it. Then he spoke again, his voice cutting gently but firmly through the moment. Acknowledging it is the first step, he said. But it is not the only one. Ryan met his gaze. What else? Malcolm did not answer immediately. He let the question sit, not to create tension, but to make sure the answer would land where it needed to. Then he looked toward Vanessa. You said you were doing your job, he said. Vanessa nodded slowly, the motion small, almost automatic. Then understand this, Malcolm continued. Your job does not give you permission to decide someone's worth before you verify their place. The words settled into her fully this time, not as a challenge, as a realization. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the last of her resistance dissolving into something quieter, something more honest. I understand, she said, and for the first time, it sounded true. The guests reacted again, but this time not with whispers, with stillness, because something had shifted beyond the surface. The moment was no longer about conflict. It was about exposure. Ryan glanced at Malcolm, then at the crowd, then back again. There is more you should know, he said carefully. Malcolm raised an eyebrow slightly, inviting him to continue. Ryan swallowed once, then spoke. The call was not just from corporate, he said. It was from the board liaison assigned to this event. A ripple moved through the guests again, sharper this time. Board, someone echoed. Another voice followed. That is higher than corporate. Malcolm's expression did not change, but the weight of the moment deepened. Because now the situation was expanding beyond a single interaction into something structural. They are monitoring this, Ryan added. In real time. The phones in the crowd suddenly felt heavier. Not just tools of observation, but evidence of something larger unfolding. Vanessa looked at Malcolm again, her voice barely above a whisper now. Who are you? She asked, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of understanding that the answer would redefine everything that had just happened. Malcolm held her gaze for a moment, then shifted his eyes toward the horizon briefly, the distant city lights reflecting faintly in them. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and final. I am the reason this event exists. The words did not need explanation. They did not need emphasis. They carried their own gravity. And as they settled over the deck, the entire atmosphere changed once more, not with noise, not with chaos, but with the quiet, undeniable realization that nothing about this moment had been ordinary, and nothing after it would be the same. No one spoke for a moment after that. The words did not echo, but they settled, heavy and precise, into every corner of the deck. I am the reason this event exists. It was not a boast. It was not a reveal meant to shock. It was a fact stated without decoration, and that made it land harder than anything else could have. The skyline in the distance seemed dimmer now, not because it changed, but because attention had shifted completely to the man standing quietly at the center of the deck. Vanessa's breath caught, just slightly, as if her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She stared at Malcolm, searching his face again, but this time not for signs of deception, not for anything she could dismiss. She was searching for confirmation, and she found it in the stillness, in the way he did not need to add anything else. Ryan stepped back half a pace, instinctively creating space, not out of fear, but out of recognition that the structure of authority had shifted entirely. He was no longer managing the moment. He was inside it, subject to it, just like everyone else. A guest near the bar whispered, "That explains everything." Another responded, "No, that changes everything." Phones remained lifted, but the energy behind them had changed. This was no longer curiosity. It was documentation, proof of a moment that had already moved beyond explanation. Vanessa finally found her voice, but it did not come out the way it had before. It was quieter, measured, almost careful. "You own this?" she asked, the question incomplete because she already understood the answer. Malcolm did not rush to respond. He let her sit with it, let the realization settle fully before he confirmed what she had already begun to accept. "I built the company that chartered this yacht," he said. "I approve this event." He paused, just long enough for the weight of those words to anchor themselves in the moment. "And I chose not to announce myself when I walked in." A ripple passed through the guests again, sharper now, more defined. Someone said, "So this was a test." Another voice answered, "No, this was reality." Vanessa's shoulders dropped slightly, the last layer of resistance dissolving into something far more difficult to carry. Accountability. She looked down briefly, then back up, her eyes no longer guarded, no longer certain, but open in a way they had not been before. "I did not recognize you," she said, and even as she spoke, she seemed to understand that the sentence did not mean what it once might have. Malcolm's response came without hesitation. "You were not supposed to," he said. The simplicity of it settled deeper than any explanation could have. Ryan stepped forward again, but this time there was no trace of authority in his movement. Only responsibility. "We need to address this properly," he said, his voice steady but subdued. "Not just here. Not just for tonight." Malcolm turned slightly toward him, acknowledging the shift. "Then start with the truth," he replied. Ryan nodded once. He turned toward the guests, drawing in a slow breath as if preparing to speak not just to them, but through them, beyond the deck, beyond the moment. "This event was designed to represent our brand," he said. "Exclusivity, access, experience." He paused, his eyes moving across the crowd, taking in the faces that had watched everything unfold. "But what happened here does not represent that. It exposed something else." The word exposed lingered in the air, heavier than anything that had come before. A woman near the railing folded her arms, nodding slightly. "It showed how fast people get judged," she said. A man beside her added, "And how little it takes." Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief second, not to escape, but to absorb. Because now the moment was no longer about her actions alone. It was about what those actions revealed. Malcolm shifted his weight slightly, not moving away, not stepping forward, just grounding himself in the space he had never actually left. His voice came again, calm, steady, undeniable. "This is not about a single mistake," he said. "It is about a pattern." The word pattern changed the temperature of the moment instantly, because it moved the conversation from isolated to systemic, from one person to something larger. Ryan nodded slowly, understanding exactly what that meant. "Then we address the pattern," he said. Malcolm's gaze held his for a moment. "That depends on whether you are willing to see it," he replied. The guests reacted again, not loudly, but collectively. A shift in posture, a shared understanding moving quietly through the crowd. Vanessa looked at Malcolm again, her voice barely above a whisper now, but clear enough to carry. "I see it," she said. And this time, there was no hesitation, no defense, just recognition. Malcolm studied her for a moment, not judging, not forgiving, just measuring the truth in what she said. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not approval, not absolution, just acknowledgement. Ryan glanced down at his phone again, then back up. "The board is still on the line," he said. "They are waiting." Malcolm did not seem surprised. "They should be," he replied. He looked out briefly toward the horizon, the distant lights reflecting faintly across the water, then back at the deck, at the people, at the moment that had grown far beyond its starting point. "Because this is not just about what happened," he continued. "It is about what happens next." The words did not close the moment. They opened it, wider than before, deeper than before. And as the reality of that settled over everyone present, one thing became clear without needing to be said. This was no longer a situation to resolve. It was a standard about to be set. The air did not move the same way anymore. Even the breeze coming off the water felt different, like it carried the weight of what had just been said. This was no longer a moment that could be smoothed over with an apology or redirected with a polite gesture. It had already crossed that line. Malcolm stood exactly where he had been from the beginning, but now the space around him had changed. It no longer questioned him. It adjusted to him. Ryan glanced down at his phone again, the screen still lit, the call still active, the silence on the other and no longer passive. It was listening, waiting, documenting. He lifted the phone slightly, then looked at Malcolm. "They want to speak with you directly," he said. His voice was careful now, every word measured. Malcolm did not reach for the phone. Not immediately. He let the request sit for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of control. Because this moment did not belong to the call. It belonged to what had already been exposed in front of everyone standing there. "Put it on speaker," Malcolm said. Ryan hesitated for half a second, then nodded and tapped the screen. A soft click followed, and then a voice came through. Calm, corporate, precise. "Mr. Hayes," the voice said, carrying across the deck without needing to raise its volume. "We are aware of the situation." A ripple moved through the guests again, sharper now. Hearing his name confirmed what many had already begun to understand. This was not speculation anymore. This was fact. Malcolm did not react to the tone, to the authority, or to the formality. "Then you are also aware of how it started," he replied. His voice remained steady, unchanged, as if he were discussing something routine instead of something unfolding in real time. The voice on the phone paused briefly. "We have reviewed the initial reports," it said, "and we are prepared to take immediate action." The word action lingered in the air, but it did not carry the same weight it might have earlier. Because now, action was not enough. Not by itself. Malcolm's eyes moved across the deck again, taking in the faces, the reactions, the quiet understanding that had formed among the guests. Then he spoke. "Immediate action does not fix a repeated pattern," he said. The voice on the phone did not respond right away. The pause this time was longer, more deliberate, as if the conversation had just shifted into a space that required more than a prepared response. Vanessa stood still, her hands now clasped lightly in front of her, her posture no longer defensive, no longer performative. She listened, really listened, because for the first time, she was not part of the authority in the moment. She was part of the lesson. Ryan glanced at her briefly, then back at Malcolm, then at the phone. He understood now that this was not something he could guide. This was something he had to witness. "What would you suggest, Mr. Hayes?" the voice finally asked. The question did not sound like a challenge. It sounded like recognition. Malcolm did not answer immediately. He looked out toward the water again, the dark surface stretching endlessly, reflecting faint fragments of light from the yacht. Then he turned back. "Start by understanding that this was not about access," he said. It was about perception. The guests reacted quietly, nodding, exchanging glances that confirmed what many of them had already felt but had not said out loud. "He is right," someone whispered. "It was never about the list." Malcolm continued, his voice steady, each word landing exactly where it needed to. "Access can be verified," he said. "Lists can be checked. But perception decides before any of that happens." The voice on the phone remained silent, listening, not interrupting, not correcting, just absorbing. "And perception," Malcolm added, "is where the problem starts." Vanessa's eyes lowered slightly again, not in shame, but in recognition of exactly what he meant. Because now she could see it, not just in what she had done, but in how quickly she had done it. Ryan took a slow breath, his expression tightening slightly as the reality of the moment continued to unfold. This was no longer about one interaction. This was about the foundation of how decisions were being made. "We can review our protocols," the voice on the phone offered. "We can implement additional verification steps." Malcolm shook his head slightly. "Protocols do not fix instinct," he said. The sentence landed harder than anything else had so far, because it stripped away the idea that this could be solved with policy alone. A guest near the bar spoke quietly, almost to himself. "That is the difference." Another voice responded, "Yeah, you cannot train instinct overnight." The conversation on the deck had become something shared now, something collective, something that extended beyond the people directly involved. Malcolm looked back at the phone. You can write as many procedures as you want, he continued. But if the first reaction is still based on assumption, then nothing actually changes. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of agreement, full of recognition, full of something that could not be easily dismissed. The voice on the phone responded more carefully this time. Then what changes it? Malcolm's expression did not shift, but his answer came without hesitation. Accountability, he said. The words settled into the space, firm and clear. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Vanessa's hands tightened slightly where they rested, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Because now the moment had reached its next stage. Not realization, not acknowledgement. Consequence. Ryan straightened slightly, his posture adjusting again, but this time not to assert authority. To accept it. The guests leaned in again, not physically, but in attention. Because everyone understood that this was the point where the moment would turn into something permanent. The voice on the phone spoke again, quieter now, more deliberate. Understood, it said. Malcolm did not respond immediately. He let the words sit. Then he spoke, his voice calm, controlled, and final. Then let us see it. And just like that, the expectation shifted again, not toward what had happened, but toward what was about to happen next. The expectation did not hang in the air for long. It settled, heavy and unavoidable, pressing into every corner of the deck. Then let us see it. The words did not echo, but they carried forward, straight into the silence that followed. No one moved. No one spoke. The ocean continued its quiet rhythm against the hull, steady and indifferent, but everything on the yacht had shifted into something sharper, something more defined. The voice on the phone responded, this time without delay. Effective immediately. It said, calm but unmistakably firm. We are initiating a full compliance response. The phrase sounded formal, structured, but the tone behind it had changed. It was no longer procedural. It was reactive. The guests felt it instantly. A man near the railing leaned slightly forward. Here it comes, he whispered. Another guest nodded. This is the part where it gets real. Ryan's grip on the phone tightened slightly, not out of fear, but out of awareness. He knew what those words meant. He had heard them before, but never like this. Never in a moment where the cause was unfolding right in front of him. All event operations are now under executive review, the voice continued. Authority is being transferred for immediate corrective action. The shift was subtle in wording, but absolute in meaning. Ryan straightened, his posture adjusting instinctively, not to reclaim control, but to recognize that it had just been removed. Vanessa felt it too, not in the words, but in the space around her. The structure she had relied on minutes ago no longer held. It had been replaced by something she could not navigate the same way. Malcolm did not react outwardly. He did not nod. He did not move. He simply listened, as if the outcome had already been understood before it was spoken. Mr. Hayes, the voice continued, you now have full authority over this event and its staff for the remainder of the evening. The sentence landed with precision. No room for interpretation. No room for delay. A guest near the bar let out a quiet breath. That is not just authority, she said softly. That is control. Another guest responded. No, that is accountability being handed back to the right person. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, not dramatically, but enough to show that the reality had fully reached her. She looked at Malcolm, not as someone she had misjudged, but as someone she had completely misunderstood. Ryan lowered the phone slightly, but did not disconnect the call. He did not need to. The message had already been delivered. The responsibility had already been reassigned. Malcolm finally moved. Just a small shift in stance, a step that brought him slightly forward, not toward anyone in particular, but into the center of what had just been placed in his hands. The deck seemed to adjust around him again, not physically, but in attention, in focus, in expectation. He looked at Ryan first, not with confrontation, with clarity. You said you wanted to make it right, he said. Ryan nodded immediately. Yes. Then start by being precise, Malcolm replied. Not polite, not general, precise. The instruction was clear. Ryan took a breath, steadying himself, then turned toward the guests again. His voice, when he spoke, carried differently this time. Less rehearsed, more direct. A decision was made based on assumption, he said. That decision led to an attempt to remove someone without verification. That person was Mr. Hayes. He paused, letting the statement settle fully. That should not have happened. The words were simple, but they carried weight because of their specificity. The guests responded with quiet nods, the kind that signaled agreement without needing to speak. Malcolm then turned his attention to Vanessa. The shift was immediate, focused, deliberate. "And you?" he said, his tone unchanged, but the direction clear. Vanessa held his gaze, not defiant, not defensive, but present. "Yes," she replied softly. Malcolm did not rush. He did not overwhelm the moment. He let it breathe, then spoke. "What did you see when I walked in?" The question was direct. No layers. No escape. Vanessa hesitated, not because she did not know the answer, but because she understood what answering it would mean. The guests leaned in again, not physically, but in attention. This was no longer about policy. This was about truth. "I saw someone who did not match the profile of the event," she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. The honesty in it shifted the moment again. Not softer, deeper. Malcolm nodded once. "And what is that profile?" he asked. Vanessa's breath caught slightly. She looked around, at the guests, at the setting, at the environment that had shaped her answer before she even spoke it. "Affluent," she said. "Established. Recognizable." Each word revealed more than it defined. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. Recognizable to who? The question landed harder than the last. Because now it was not about description. It was about perspective. Vanessa did not answer immediately. She could not. Because the answer was no longer clear in the way it had been minutes ago. A guest near the bar spoke quietly. "That is the real question." Another added, "Yeah, recognizable according to what standard?" Malcolm did not break eye contact. "You did not check the list," he said. "You checked your perception." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Yes." The admission was complete now. Not partial, not guarded, just true. The guests reacted again, not loudly, but collectively. A shift in posture. A shared understanding moving through the space. Ryan watched the exchange carefully, not interrupting, not guiding, just witnessing. Because this was no longer something that needed management. It needed clarity. Malcolm took a small breath, then spoke again, his voice calm, but carrying further now. "This is where accountability begins," he said. "Not with policies, not with statements, with understanding exactly what happened and why." The deck remained still, the ocean steady beyond it, the city lights distant but constant. And in that moment, everything had aligned into something undeniable. Not just a correction, not just a consequence. A standard being set in real time, in front of everyone who had chosen to watch instead of look away. The moment did not move forward quickly. It deepened instead. Like the tide pulling back before a wave, everything on the deck seemed to pause, suspended between what had just been said and what had yet to be done. Malcolm stood still, his presence no longer questioned, no longer debated, but fully acknowledged. The authority that had been transferred to him was not loud, not performative, but absolute in a way that did not require explanation. Vanessa remained where she was, her posture no longer guarded, her expression no longer shaped by control, but by understanding that was still settling into place. The question she had answered lingered in the air, not because it needed repetition, but because it had revealed something larger than itself. Ryan shifted slightly to the side, creating space without being told, as if the structure of the moment now dictated movement instead of the people within it. The guests remained attentive, their focus sharpened, their role no longer passive. They were no longer just observers. They were witnesses. Malcolm's voice came again, steady, deliberate, carrying just enough to reach those closest while still holding the weight of the entire space. "Understanding is not the end of this," he said. "It is the beginning." The words did not raise the tension. They clarified it. Vanessa nodded slowly, almost instinctively, as if her body had already accepted what her mind was still processing. "Then what happens next?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. The question was no longer defensive. It was direct. Malcolm did not answer immediately. He turned his gaze outward, briefly, toward the water, the horizon stretching far beyond the yacht, a reminder that this moment existed within something much larger. Then he looked back at her. "Now we make sure this does not happen again," he said. The simplicity of it carried more weight than any complex explanation could have. A guest near the railing spoke softly. "That is the part most people skip." Another voice responded, "Yeah, They apologize and move on. Malcolm continued, his tone unchanged. But moving on without changing anything is just repeating the same mistake with better language. The statement landed with precision. Not harsh, not exaggerated, just true. Ryan nodded once, his expression tightening slightly as he absorbed the implication. Then we need to address how decisions are made at the front line, he said. Not just what decisions are made. Malcolm glanced at him briefly, acknowledging the point. Exactly, he replied. Because by the time a decision reaches a policy, it is already too late. The guests reacted again, quietly, but with recognition. This was no longer a conversation about one event. It was about the structure behind it. Vanessa shifted her weight slightly, her hands now resting at her sides, no longer searching for position, no longer holding tension. I made that decision, she said, before I checked anything. Malcolm nodded once. Yes, he said. You did. There was no accusation in his voice. No judgment. Just confirmation. And that made it harder to dismiss. So what changes that? She asked. Malcolm held her gaze for a moment, then answered. You do, he said. The answer was simple, but it did not feel small. It expanded instead, opening into something that extended beyond her, beyond the deck, beyond the moment itself. Vanessa blinked, processing it. How? She asked. Malcolm took a slow breath, not because he needed time, but because the answer required clarity. You stop deciding before you know, he said. You ask before you assume. And you treat every guest as if their presence is valid until proven otherwise. The words settled into the space, firm and clear. A guest near the bar nodded. That should be standard everywhere, she said. Another added, it is not, though. That is the problem. Ryan looked out across the deck, then back at Malcolm. We can implement that, he said. We can reinforce it through training. Malcolm's expression remained steady. Training helps, he said, but only if it changes behavior when no one is watching. The line landed with weight. Because everyone knew they were being watched now. Phones were still raised. Eyes were still focused. But the real test would come later, when none of this was visible. Vanessa understood that too. It showed in the way she nodded, slower this time, more deliberate. Then it has to start here, she said. Malcolm gave a small nod. It already did, he replied. The ocean moved quietly beyond them, the city lights reflecting faintly across the water, unchanged by what had just unfolded, yet somehow part of it. The deck, however, had transformed completely. Not in design, not in structure, but in awareness. Ryan glanced down at the phone again, still connected, still listening. The board is still on the line, he said. Malcolm did not look at the phone. They heard everything they needed to hear, he replied. The voice on the phone spoke again, softer now, less formal. We did, it said, and we will be following up with a full review. Malcolm nodded slightly, not in approval, but in acknowledgement. Make sure it is not just a review, he said. Make sure it leads to change. The line went quiet again, not disconnected, but reflective. Vanessa looked around the deck once more, at the guests, at the staff, at the space that had shifted around her. Then she looked back at Malcolm. I understand now, she said. This time, there was no hesitation at all. Malcolm studied her for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not as a conclusion, as a beginning. And as the moment settled into something quieter, something more grounded, one thing became clear to everyone standing there. This was not just a correction. It was a reset. And it had happened in real time, in full view, without noise, without chaos, without force. Just clarity, truth, and the kind of authority that does not need to prove itself to be undeniable. The reset did not feel loud. It did not come with applause or sudden movement. It settled instead, like a quiet shift in gravity that everyone could feel, but no one needed to announce. The music remained low, almost distant now, no longer the center of the evening. The real focus had already taken its place. Malcolm stood where he had always been, but now the space recognized him. Not because of what he said, but because of what had been revealed. Vanessa inhaled slowly, her shoulders rising just slightly before settling again. The tension she had carried earlier was gone, but what replaced it was heavier. Not fear. Responsibility. She looked at Malcolm again, not searching, not questioning, but acknowledging. I want to correct this properly, she said, her voice steady, no longer defensive. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, considering her words. Then do not correct it for me, he replied. Correct it for the next person who walks in. The sentence landed differently than anything before it, because it shifted the focus away from him entirely. A guest near the bar nodded immediately. That is the real point, she said. It is never just about one person. Another voice followed. It is about who comes after. Vanessa absorbed that, her gaze lowering briefly before returning to Malcolm. Then I need to change how I see people, she said. The honesty in her voice was no longer hesitant. It was grounded. Malcolm gave a small nod. Yes, he said, because the problem did not start with what you did. It started with how you saw me before you did anything. The words settled deeply, not just with her, but with everyone listening. Ryan stepped forward slightly, his posture no longer uncertain, but aligned with the direction the moment had taken. We are going to implement immediate changes, he said. Frontline staff will verify before acting. No exceptions. Malcolm glanced at him, then shook his head slightly. Verification is a step, he said, not a mindset. Ryan paused, understanding the distinction. Then we reinforce both, he replied. Malcolm did not argue. He simply held the silence long enough for the meaning to sink in. Around them, the guests had shifted again, no longer tense, but engaged in a different way. Not as spectators of conflict, but as witnesses to something being rebuilt in real time. A man near the railing spoke quietly. You can see it happening, he said. Right here. Another guest responded, yeah. Most places would just move on and pretend it did not happen. Malcolm turned slightly, his gaze moving across the deck, taking in the people, the reactions, the awareness that had formed. Then his eyes stopped on one of the guests holding a phone. Not filming aggressively, just holding it steady, documenting. You kept recording, Malcolm said. The guest nodded, a little unsure. Yes, he replied. Malcolm gave a small nod in return. Good, he said, because moments like this should not disappear. The statement carried beyond the deck, beyond the night, into something larger. The guest lowered the phone slightly, not stopping, but understanding the weight of what he was capturing. Vanessa watched that exchange closely, then looked back at Malcolm. You are not angry, she said, more as an observation than a question. Malcolm's expression remained calm. Anger does not fix this, he replied. Clarity does. The simplicity of it shifted the tone again, grounding the moment even further. Ryan exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time since the situation began. Then we move forward with clarity, he said. Malcolm nodded once. Yes, he replied. But do not move too fast. Ryan frowned slightly. Why? Malcolm looked at him directly. Because if you rush past this, you will miss what it is trying to show you. The sentence landed with quiet force. A guest near the bar whispered, that is true. Another added, people always rush to fix things instead of understanding them. Vanessa took a step back, not retreating, but repositioning herself in the moment. Her eyes moved across the deck, seeing it differently now. Not as a controlled environment, not as a curated space, but as a place where every decision mattered more than she had realized. I see it now, she said again, but this time it sounded deeper, more complete. Malcolm studied her for a brief moment, then shifted his attention back to the larger space. Then show it, he said. The instruction was simple, but it carried expectation. Vanessa nodded, her posture straightening, not in defense, but in purpose. Ryan glanced at the phone again, then slowly ended the call. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was settled, defined. The board had heard enough. The moment belonged to the people on the deck now. Malcolm looked out toward the horizon one more time, the city lights steady in the distance, unchanged by what had unfolded. Then he turned back. This event can continue, he said. The word surprised a few guests. A man near the railing raised his eyebrows slightly. After all this, he murmured. Malcolm heard it, and answered without looking directly at him. Yes, he said, because stopping it would not prove anything. Changing how it runs will. The statement reframed everything again. Not disruption. Transformation. Ryan nodded slowly. Then we continue, he said, his voice steady. Vanessa took a breath, then moved with intention for the first time since the moment began. Not to control, not to correct superficially, but to apply what had just been laid out in front of her. The staff nearby adjusted as well, subtle but immediate, their awareness heightened, their actions more deliberate. The guests watched, not with suspicion anymore, but with a quiet understanding that something real had just taken place. Malcolm remained where he was, no longer at the center of conflict, but at the center of something else entirely. A shift, a standard, a line that had been drawn not with force, but with clarity. And as the yacht moved steadily through the dark water, one thing became undeniable to everyone on board. This was not just a moment that would be remembered. It was one that would change how moments like this were handled long after the night was over. The yacht did not stop. It did not slow. It continued forward, cutting cleanly through the dark water as if nothing had happened, but everything on board had changed. The music gradually returned to its original volume, but it no longer defined the atmosphere. The people did. Conversations resumed, but they were different now. Slower, more aware. Every interaction carried a subtle shift, a quiet recalibration that could not be undone. Malcolm stepped slightly to the side, no longer positioned as the center of attention, but still the axis around which the moment had turned. He picked up a glass of water from a nearby tray, not champagne, not anything celebratory, just water, simple and unremarkable, and took a small sip. The gesture was understated, almost invisible, but it grounded the space again. Vanessa moved carefully across the deck, her steps deliberate, no longer driven by assumption, but by attention. She approached a couple near the entrance of the VIP section, her voice calm, respectful. "Welcome," she said. "Please let me know if you need anything." There was no hesitation in her tone, no filtering in her gaze. Just presence. The couple nodded, surprised but appreciative. A small moment. But it mattered. Ryan stood near the center, observing everything, not intervening, not directing, just watching how the space responded when pressure had been replaced with awareness. He glanced briefly at Malcolm, who gave no signal, no instruction, just a steady presence that did not need reinforcement. A guest approached Malcolm cautiously, not out of fear, but out of curiosity shaped by respect. "I have to ask," the man said, adjusting his jacket slightly. "Why did you not say who you were from the beginning?" Malcolm looked at him, then out toward the water for a brief moment before answering. "Because that would not have changed what happened," he said. The man paused, considering that. "You think it would have been different?" Malcolm met his gaze again. "I know it would have been different," he replied. "But that is exactly why it matters that I did not." The answer settled into the conversation, leaving no room for easy dismissal. The guest nodded slowly. "That makes sense," he said, though his tone suggested he was still processing it. Nearby, another guest joined the conversation. "So this was intentional?" she asked. Malcolm shook his head slightly. "No," he said, "but I chose not to interrupt it." The distinction was clear. He had not created the moment. He had allowed it to reveal itself. Vanessa overheard part of the exchange as she moved past, her steps slowing for just a fraction of a second. The words landed differently for her. Not as theory, as reflection. Ryan walked over to Malcolm, his posture relaxed but attentive. "We have started adjusting the guest verification flow," he said. "Staff are being briefed in real time." Malcolm nodded once. "Good," he replied. "But do not overcorrect." Ryan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Malcolm looked around the deck, at the interactions, at the subtle shifts already taking place. "If they become afraid to act, that creates a different problem," he said. "The goal is not hesitation. It is awareness." Ryan absorbed that, nodding slowly. "Understood," he said. "Balance, not fear." Malcolm gave a small nod. "Exactly." A server passed by with a tray of drinks, pausing briefly as she approached a group of guests. "Would you like anything?" she asked, her tone warm, her posture open. There was no scanning, no subtle judgment in her eyes. Just service. One of the guests smiled. "Yes, thank you," he said. Another small moment. Another adjustment. The ripple effect had begun. Vanessa returned to the main area, her movements more fluid now, less calculated. She stopped near Ryan, her voice low. "I am seeing it differently already," she said. Ryan glanced at her. "Good," he replied. "That means it is working." She nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "It is not just what I do," she said. "It is what I assume before I do anything." Ryan did not respond immediately. He simply gave a small nod, acknowledging that she had reached the point that mattered most. Malcolm watched from a distance, not overseeing, not directing, just present. The space continued to adjust around him, not because he demanded it, but because it had been forced to confront itself. A guest who had been filming earlier approached cautiously, lowering his phone slightly. "I have been recording this," he said. I hope that is okay. Malcolm looked at him, then at the phone, then back at him. It is, he said. Just make sure you show all of it. The guest nodded quickly. I will, he replied. Not just the beginning. Malcolm gave a slight nod. That is the part people need to see, he said. Not just what went wrong, but what changed. The guest stepped back, understanding the weight of that responsibility. The yacht moved steadily forward, the city lights growing slightly closer, reflecting across the water in long, shimmering lines. The night had not ended, but it had transformed. Ryan looked out over the deck, then back at Malcolm. You could have shut this down, he said. Malcolm shook his head slightly. That would have been easier, he replied. But it would not have fixed anything. Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. This way is harder, he said. Malcolm took another small sip of water. It is, he said, but it lasts longer. The words settled into the space, not as a conclusion, but as a principle. Around them, the event continued, but not as it had before. Every interaction carried intention. Every glance held awareness. The structure of the night had been rebuilt without being paused, corrected without being erased. Vanessa approached another guest, her voice calm, her presence steady. Welcome, she said again, and this time, it sounded different. Not rehearsed, not filtered, just real. And as the yacht continued its path through the dark water, one thing became clear without anyone needing to say it out loud. This was no longer just an event. It was proof that change does not require disruption. It requires recognition, accountability, and the willingness to let a moment reveal what has been hidden for far too long. The night did not rush forward. It unfolded, slowly, intentionally, like something that had been forced to reset its own rhythm. The yacht continued cutting through the water, steady and composed, but the energy on board had shifted into something quieter, more deliberate. Conversations no longer floated aimlessly. They landed. They carried weight. Every exchange, every glance, every interaction now seemed to pass through a filter of awareness that had not existed before. Malcolm stood near the edge of the deck, one hand resting lightly against the polished railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the city lights stretched into the distance. He was no longer the center of attention, but the impact of his presence still shaped everything around him. Not through control, through clarity. Vanessa moved through the space again, but this time there was no performance in her steps. No invisible checklist guiding her reactions. She paused near a guest who had just stepped onto the upper deck, a man dressed simply, nothing that stood out against the curated elegance of the event. Before, she might have scanned him, measured him, decided something without realizing it. Now she did not. Welcome, she said, her voice calm, genuine. Can I help you find anything? The man smiled, slightly surprised, then nodded. Just looking around, he replied. Vanessa returned the smile, not forced, not calculated, just present. Take your time, she said. It was a small exchange, but it was different, and that difference mattered. Ryan watched from a distance, arms loosely at his sides, no longer directing, no longer intervening. He was observing the shift in real time. Not the big gestures, the small ones. The ones that actually defined how a space functioned when no one was forcing it to change. He glanced toward Malcolm, who had not moved, who had not given a single additional instruction. And yet, everything was adjusting. A guest approached Malcolm again, this time a woman holding her phone, though she had lowered it now, no longer recording. I have been thinking about what you said, she began, her tone thoughtful. Malcolm turned slightly, giving her his attention without fully leaving his position. Which part? He asked. She hesitated for a moment. About perception, she said. About how it happens before anything else. Malcolm nodded once. It always does, he replied. The woman looked out toward the water briefly, then back at him. I think I have done that before, she admitted. Not like this. But still, I assumed something about someone without checking. Malcolm did not respond immediately. He let her sit with that realization. Then he spoke. Most people have, he said. The difference is whether you recognize it. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. And if you do, she asked. Malcolm's expression remained steady. Then you decide if you want to keep doing it, he said. The simplicity of the answer made it harder to ignore. The woman gave a small nod, then stepped back, her expression quieter now, more reflective. Across the deck, a group of guests stood near the bar, their conversation shifting in tone. It is strange, one of them said. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting. No scene. But it still changed everything. Another nodded. That is because it was real, he replied. No performance. Just truth. A third added, that is why it hit harder. Vanessa passed by them, catching fragments of their conversation. She did not interrupt. She did not need to. She understood what they meant. Because she felt it too. Ryan moved closer to her, his voice low. How are you holding up, he asked. Vanessa took a small breath before answering. Different, she said. Ryan nodded slightly. That is a start, he replied. She looked at him, then back out across the deck. It is more than that, she said. It is like I can see the moment before I act now. Like there is a pause that was not there before. Ryan considered that, then gave a small nod. That pause is what matters, he said. That is where the decision actually happens. Vanessa nodded, understanding settling deeper into place. Nearby, the staff continued moving through the space, but their rhythm had changed. Not slower, more intentional. They greeted guests without scanning. They offered assistance without assumption. It was subtle, but it was visible. Malcolm turned slightly, his gaze moving across the deck once more. Not evaluating, not correcting, just observing. The shift had taken hold. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to be real. Ryan approached him again, stopping a respectful distance away. The team is responding well, he said. You can see it. Malcolm glanced at him briefly, then back at the deck. They are not responding to me, he said. They are responding to what they saw. Ryan paused, then nodded slowly. That is true, he admitted. Malcolm rested, his hand against the railing again, his posture relaxed but grounded. That is how change lasts, he added, when it does not depend on who is watching. The words settled quietly between them. Ryan looked out over the water, then back at the deck. I think they understand that now, he said. Malcolm gave a small nod. Good, he replied. The yacht continued forward, the city drawing closer, the lights reflecting across the water in long, steady lines. The night had not ended, but it had evolved into something else entirely. Not just an event, not just a gathering, a moment that had revealed something deeper. And as the conversations continued, as the interactions unfolded, as the space adjusted around a new awareness, one thing became clear to everyone who had been there from the beginning. Nothing about this night would be forgotten. Not because of what went wrong, but because of what changed after it did. The city was closer now. The skyline that once sat distant and untouchable had grown larger, clearer, its lights stretching higher into the night sky, like something no longer abstract but within reach. The yacht moved steadily toward it, cutting through the dark water with quiet precision, and on board, the energy had settled into something steady, something grounded. The shift that had started as tension had now become structure. Not forced, not temporary, real. Malcolm remained near the edge of the deck, but his presence no longer drew attention in the same way. It did not need to. What had been set into motion was already moving on its own. Vanessa stood near the entrance of the upper deck, watching the flow of guests as they moved freely through the space. She did not scan them anymore. She did not measure them against anything invisible. She simply observed, present, aware, and ready to respond without assumption. A couple approached, dressed simply, nothing that would have stood out earlier in the evening. Vanessa stepped forward slightly, her voice calm and even. Welcome, she said. Let me know if you would like a tour of the deck. The man smiled, clearly at ease. That would be great, he replied. Vanessa nodded, gesturing gently toward the lounge area. Right this way, she said. The interaction was smooth, natural, without friction, and more importantly, without hesitation. Ryan watched from a few steps away, his expression thoughtful but steady. He did not interrupt. He did not correct. He did not need to. The change was visible without being announced. A guest who had been part of the earlier crowd leaned toward another and said quietly, "It is different now." The other nodded. "You can feel it," she replied. "No one is being sized up anymore." The first guest glanced toward Malcolm. "That is because someone forced the space to see itself," he said. Malcolm heard the comment, but did not react outwardly. He did not need acknowledgement. He did not need validation. What mattered had already happened. A server approached Malcolm with a tray, her posture open, her tone respectful. "Would you like anything else?" she asked. Malcolm looked at her briefly, then gave a small nod. "I am good," he said. "Thank you." She returned the nod and moved on, her steps confident, her presence steady. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just service. Ryan walked over slowly, stopping beside Malcolm without interrupting the quiet rhythm of the moment. The team has adjusted, he said. Malcolm glanced at him briefly. They have, he replied. Ryan folded his arms loosely, looking out over the deck. It did not take long, he added. Malcolm shook his head slightly. It never does, he said. When people are willing to see what is in front of them. Ryan considered that, then nodded. And when they are not, he asked. Malcolm's gaze returned to the horizon. Then nothing changes, he said simply. The answer did not carry frustration. It carried truth. Nearby, Vanessa returned from guiding the couple through the deck, her movements fluid, her posture relaxed but attentive. She stopped briefly, scanning the space, not for who belonged, but for who might need something. Her eyes landed on a guest standing alone near the railing. She approached without hesitation. Are you enjoying the view? She asked. The guest smiled. It is incredible, he said. Vanessa nodded. It really is, she replied. There was no tension in the exchange. No barrier, just connection. Ryan watched her for a moment, then glanced at Malcolm. She is applying it, he said. Malcolm gave a small nod. Yes, he replied. Because now she understands it. Ryan shifted his weight slightly. That is the difference, is it not? He asked. Malcolm looked at him. Understanding changes behavior, he said. Instructions only change actions. The distinction settled quietly between them. Around the deck, the guests had fully returned to conversation, but the tone remained different. More aware, more intentional. A group near the bar discussed what had happened earlier, not with excitement, but with reflection. It could have gone very differently, one of them said. Another nodded. But it did not, he replied. That is what matters. A third added, most places would have ignored it. The first guest shook his head. Not this time, he said. Malcolm turned slightly, his eyes moving across the deck once more. Not searching, not evaluating, just observing the result of what had been set into motion. The ripple effect was complete. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. And that was enough for now. Ryan looked at his phone briefly, then slipped it back into his pocket. Corporate has already started drafting the follow-up, he said. Malcolm nodded once. Good, he replied. Make sure it reflects what actually happened. Ryan gave a small, understanding smile. It will, he said. Vanessa approached them both, her posture steady, her expression clear. Thank you, she said, looking directly at Malcolm. Malcolm met her gaze, not with approval, not with dismissal, just acknowledgement. You did the work, he said. Not me. Vanessa shook her head slightly. You made me see it, she replied. Malcolm did not respond immediately. He let the statement sit, then gave a small nod. Seeing it is the hardest part, he said. The yacht continued forward, the city now close enough to reflect clearly in the water, each light stretching into long, shimmering lines across the surface. The night was still moving, still alive, but it had changed direction. Not outwardly, internally. And as the final stretch of water closed between the yacht and the shore, one truth remained clear to everyone who had been part of the moment. What happened earlier did not end the night. It redefined it. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with something far more lasting. Awareness that would not disappear when the lights faded or the music stopped. Awareness that would follow them long after they stepped off the deck and back into the world beyond it. The yacht slowed as it approached the dock, the hum of the engines softening into a low, steady vibration beneath the deck. The city lights now stood fully formed in front of them, no longer distant, no longer abstract, but close enough to reflect clearly in every window, every polished surface, every quiet moment that remained. The night had not ended, but it had reached something final. Not an ending, a conclusion. Malcolm stepped away from the railing, his movements unhurried, grounded, as if nothing about the evening had required effort, even though everything about it had required presence. Around him, the guests began to gather their things, conversations continuing in softer tones, not fading, but settling into something reflective. No one rushed. No one broke the moment. Because everyone understood, in their own way, that they had witnessed something that did not repeat itself easily. Vanessa stood near the exit point of the deck, her posture steady, her expression calm, greeting each guest as they began to move toward the dock. Thank you for being here, she said, her voice consistent, genuine, not filtered through expectation, not shaped by assumption. Each guest received the same tone, the same presence, the same respect. And this time, it did not feel like a role. It felt like a decision. Ryan remained a few steps behind, observing quietly, no longer measuring performance, no longer correcting behavior, just watching the result of what had been built in real time. He glanced toward Malcolm, who was now walking slowly across the deck, not toward anyone in particular, not seeking conversation, just moving through the space he had reshaped without ever forcing it. A guest approached him one last time, an older man, his expression thoughtful, measured. "I have been to events like this for years," the man said, "and I have never seen one change like this without shutting everything down." Malcolm looked at him, his expression calm, steady. "Shutting it down hides the problem," he said. "Letting it continue shows the solution." The man nodded slowly, absorbing that. "You handled it differently," he said. Malcolm gave a small nod. "It needed to be handled differently," he replied. The man extended his hand. Malcolm shook it, firm, simple, no added gesture, no emphasis. Just acknowledgement. As the man stepped away, Vanessa approached Malcolm, stopping at a respectful distance, her posture aligned, her voice clear. "We are docking in 2 minutes," she said. Malcolm nodded once. "Thank you," he replied. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then spoke again. "I will carry this with me," she said. The words were not dramatic. They were not rehearsed. They were direct. Malcolm met her gaze. "Make sure you do," he said, "because it will show in how you treat the next person who walks in." Vanessa nodded, her expression steady. "It already is," she replied. Malcolm gave a small nod, not as approval, but as recognition. Ryan stepped closer, his voice low. "Everything is set for departure," he said. Malcolm glanced toward the dock, where the crew had begun preparing for arrival, then back at Ryan. "Good," he replied. Ryan paused, then added, "What happened tonight? It will not stay here." Malcolm's expression did not change. "It should not," he said. "If it does, then it meant nothing." The statement settled between them, not heavy, but clear. Around them, guests began stepping off the yacht one by one, moving onto the dock, carrying their conversations with them, their thoughts, their reflections, their awareness. Some glanced back once more before leaving, not to see the yacht, but to mark the moment. Vanessa continued greeting each person, her tone unchanged, her presence consistent, until the last of the guests had stepped off. The deck grew quieter, the space opening up again, but it did not feel empty. It felt complete. Ryan exhaled slowly, looking around the deck, then back at Malcolm. "That was not just an event," he said. Malcolm looked out toward the city one final time before answering. "No," he said. "It was a mirror." Ryan nodded, understanding settling fully now. "And people saw themselves," he added. Malcolm turned slightly, his gaze steady. "That is the only way anything changes," he said. The crew continued their work quietly, securing lines, adjusting equipment, preparing the yacht for its next movement, its next destination, its next moment that would carry whatever had been learned forward or leave it behind. Vanessa approached them once more, her posture relaxed now, no tension remaining. "We are clear," she said. Ryan nodded. "Good work," he replied. Vanessa did not smile immediately. She simply nodded, then looked at Malcolm. "Thank you," she said again, not as a formality, but as something grounded. Malcolm met her gaze, then gave a small nod. "Do not thank me," he said. "Show it." She nodded once more, understanding that the statement was not a dismissal. It was a direction. Malcolm turned and began walking toward the exit, his steps steady, his presence unchanged from the moment he first stepped onto the yacht. No announcement, no recognition, no need for either. Ryan watched him go, then looked out across the dock, where the city continued its movement, unaware of what had just unfolded, yet shaped by it in ways it would never fully see. Vanessa stood beside him, her gaze following the same direction. "It feels different now," she said quietly. Ryan nodded. "That is because it is," he replied. The yacht remained docked, still, quiet, but no longer the same space it had been when the night began. And as Malcolm stepped off onto the dock and disappeared into the rhythm of the city, one truth remained, clear and unshaken. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to prove anything. He simply allowed the moment to reveal itself. And in doing so, he did not just change the room. He changed what the room would never allow itself to ignore again.